Hey guys, it's Brendan Mayer with the Whitetails of New York. Today I want to talk about calling with you guys. It's a topic that many of us have talked about in the past. It's a lot of you hear a lot of hunters going ahead and saying, you know, I had to get that buck out of the herd. It just had inferior genetics. It was never going to really produce anything, and I don't want that buck breeding. It's something you hear over and over and over every single year. And really, at the end of the day, what it is it's justifying the reason to shoot an animal. Especially in today's day and age, a lot of hunters are transitioning into trying to increase the overall quality of antlers you're seeing on your property. And by shooting an inferior buck, one that doesn't really have a great potential or what you don't think has great potential, is just justifying the means, is justifying why you're shooting that animal. It's making you feel okay to shoot that animal. It's really, at the end of the day, that's all calling is. It's the people believe that if you call deer, you are eventually going to influence the genetics on your property. You're going to increase the overall antler quality by taking out those inferior bucks. So first of all, can you change the genetics in a free ranging setting by calling deer? 110% no. You cannot change the genetics. Does not matter what you think. It has been proven in multiple studies. The most recent one and the most comprehensive, in detail, just really good study they did was on the Comanche Ranch by Donnie Drager down in western Texas. And they did what a lot of landowners are never going to be capable of doing, including myself, including pretty much every hunter across the United States. Just you don't have the time, money, resources to go ahead and try to call deer the way they did on this ranch. And the reason they went all out is because they wanted to find out at the highest level, the most intense calling possible. If you can't change the genetics by doing that, you will never be able to change the genetics in a free ranging setting. Us as the average hunter will never be able to change those genetics. So what they did was they had 3 different pastures, and they called them pastures, but it was really thousands of acres of land. I believe actually where they did the moderate calling was about 18,000 acres. I could be a little bit off on these numbers, but I will attach the article written by the National Deer Association down in the description if you guys want to take a look at that. It's a great article. It really goes in depth, a lot more than what I'm going to. So they had an aggressive area where they did really intensive calling. They did a moderate area, and then they had a controlled area. And that's something to point out really quickly, that what Donnie said, and it's a great point to make. If you're ever trying to do an experiment, if you're ever trying to prove a point that something can have an impact on anything, you have to have a controlled area. If you don't have a controlled area, you have no comparison whatsoever. You have nothing to compare your experiment to what would be taking place in an area that doesn't have those same practices taking place. So obviously they had those intensive area, the moderate area, and then an area that they weren't calling. And a great point to make was during this study, they actually had an increase of 10 to 15 inches on the antlers, the overall Boone and Crockett score of their deer herd. And, you know, a person that did not have a controlled area, they'd say, oh, wow, look at this. I mean, we've increased, just in a few years, we've increased the overall antler potential by 15 inches. That just wasn't the case. And western Texas is a really tough environment that doesn't receive a lot of rainfall. And what happened is the first initial year that they were taking the antler sizes and taking the measurements of their deer herd, it was a dry year. And rainfall in a climate like that has a tremendous impact on the overall antler size and the quality of bucks that you're seeing for a given year. So from one year to another, just for that change in rainfall amounts had that much of an impact on the antler sizes. Now, how did they know that it wasn't because of calling? Well, because in the controlled environment where no calling was taking place, they saw that same increase in antler size. So that's kind of off topic there, but it's just very important. If you're ever going to have any sort of experiment and you want people to actually listen to you, you have to have a controlled area to compare it to. It's just impossible to make people believe that you had that impact without having a controlled area that had not that same practices taking place that you can compare it to. So what they did in these areas is they picked out certain characteristics and criteria that a buck had to meet in order to not be called. And over the years of this experiment, they called thousands of deer. And in the intensive area, they called almost 95% of the yearlings going into the next age class, because they just did not meet those requirements that they had to meet in order to not be called. And in that severe circumstances, what they actually found was a really big swing in their buck to doe ratio, which really decreased the overall health of the herd. We'll go into that here in a few minutes, but they went from a 1-to-1 ratio in that intensive area to a 6-to-1 ratio, 6 doe per 1 buck. That is an awful ratio. Something that, you know, a lot of people believe you see across the landscape. It's not quite that bad. In areas it is fairly bad, but not quite that bad. What happens when your ratio is off like that? There's just not enough buck to breed the doe. And it's important to realize that doe can only be bred for a very short amount of time. It's only about 24 to 36 hours that they are actually in heat, in estrus, ready to be bred. If they miss that window and they are not bred within that window, then it's now another 28 days they have to wait for their next cycle in order to be bred. That's where the second rut comes from, where you hear everybody talking about all these doe are coming to estrus around the same time. So that's the first rut takes place. And in a healthy environment, the majority, if not every deer, is bred during that time frame. And the ones that aren't bred then are obviously in estrus about 28 days after that. And there is the second rut. So when you have a really lopsided ratio, buck to doe ratio, a lot of those doe are not being bred. And they're going to wait for the second, possibly even third rut in order to be bred. Over time, what happens is that you have a lot of late drop fawns. And late drop fawns really create a weak, unhealthy herd. It's been proven that a late drop buck is never going to be capable of closing that gap and actually showing their full genetic potential, because they were dropped late. They don't have enough time in between during the growing season, the actual plants growing. They don't have enough time to increase their antler potential and to show that full potential before the winter months set in. And this is something that over time can create obviously a really unhealthy herd, low survival rates because of late drop fawns. And here in northern settings, we're in central New York here, even further north, like up in the Adirondacks of New York, late drop fawns is going to lead to more mortality and death during the winter months. You're just not going to have enough time. That fawn is not going to have enough time to get to full, you know, their full body potential and to be able to be strong enough to survive the winter. So that's an extreme case scenario, and that's an extreme calling circumstances, how that can impact the health of the herd negatively. So what they also did, and there was another study before this one, I'm sure somebody's going to tell me what it was. I don't remember off the top of my head here. But during the Comanche study and Donnie Drager, what they did was they took the DNA sample from each deer that they captured. And over time, what they did was they were able to create a family tree. So a buck, they found his offspring, his son, and then his grandson. And over time, what they did was they gave each buck a breeding value. And really what the breeding value is what is that buck capable, or what is his offspring capable of producing? So a buck that his offspring had really great antlers, and above average antlers, that buck was given a high breeding value. And out of the over 2,000 bucks that they captured and did this DNA testing on, the buck that actually had the highest breeding value was a buck that only had average antler sizes. And they found that bucks that had great antler sizes actually had a poor breeding value. So what does that even tell us? You cannot tell a buck's potential in their breeding value, what their offspring is going to look like, just because of their antler size. It has nothing to do with genetics. Absolutely nothing to do with it. You cannot tell in a free-ranging setting how a buck is going to give a good offspring and a buck that is going to have really great antlers. You just can't tell in a free-ranging setting. Not only that, I mean, there's even more, there's way too many variables that can take place. Another one is obviously all the genetic potential, all that antler potential is not coming all from the buck. 50% or more is coming from that doe. In a free ranging setting, you have no idea what kind of offspring that doe is going to give off. You have no idea. It's hard to keep track of doe, obviously, in a free ranging setting without having a bunch of ear tags out there that you can tell, you know, that's that doe with a high breeding value. You just can't tell. It's not possible. You cannot change the genetic potential. Most of us don't have enough property to even try to influence the quality of the herd through culling. You know, your average landowner, let's say we only own 50 to 100 acres. Really, at that point, you need to understand your circumstances and what your goals should be compared to those circumstances. On a small property like that, what you should be trying to do is to, first of all, increase the quality of your habitat through improvements such as some timber stand improvement, increasing the overall biomass on the ground, the food availability for the deer herd, increasing the overall nutritional carrying capacity on your property, maybe with supplemental food plots. Those are where you can really have a good impact and truly impact the herd and the health of the herd. And not only that, by planting fall food plots, you can have a really good chance of killing the mature buck in the neighborhood. And for most of us, that's what our goals should be, is to really control the herd and to harvest that mature buck year in and year out. And with the proper setup on your property, the high quality habitat, and with hunting strategies that are not invasive, that's the big hiccup here. You have to hunt your property smart. You have to act like a predator. You cannot just be traipsing through the woods, shining your flashlight all over as you're entering in the dark. That's just not going to happen. You're not going to kill a mature buck year in and year out doing that. So for the majority of us, just killing that mature buck and harvesting that mature buck in the neighborhood is really going to be our goal. Now, let's say you own 200, 300, 400 acres, close to 500 really would be great for this sort of circumstances. Or let's say you're part of a co-op that controls, you know, a decent amount of land. Really, to be extremely effective, up to 1,000 acres would be fantastic. Now, I know I'm speaking to a very, very select few, maybe even nobody on that's watching this video, but what can you do through culling? And a book was written by Dr. Steve Damaris and Dr. Bronson Strickland, and what they actually titled it was Selective Harvest. What does that mean? So they just pretty much changed the name from culling to Selective Harvest. But how that can actually impact you for the good is not by increasing the genetic potential, not by improving genetics. Again, just like we have discussed, that's just not possible in a free-ranging setting. What you can do through Selective Harvest is allowing the bucks that show the most potential to reach full maturity and full potential. And it's important to realize that a buck does not reach their full potential until age 6.5, possibly even 7.5. It takes a really long time for them to reach 100% of their full antler potential. Now, the majority of hunters, I hear too many people saying that try to practice QDMA. They say, hey, I want to shoot a 140 every year. I want to shoot a 130 every year. I mean, everything 130 and above is what we're going to harvest. That is not a good management strategy if you want to increase and allow bucks to reach their full potential. There's only one way to manage a herd, and that's through age. And judging age on the hoof, learning bucks and watching them grow and knowing roughly the age of that buck. That's the only way you're really going to have a true impact on your herd. Because, and let me explain myself, because let's say you have a 3-year-old buck. He's a 130. He's a great 3-year-old buck. Now let's say you have a 120-inch 5-year-old buck. Unfortunately, in the majority of cases, that 3-year-old buck is the one that's going to be shot because that meets your inch criteria on your property. Over time, really what you're doing is you're taking out the bucks that have the greatest potential. You're taking them out at a very young age. You're not allowing them to reach their full potential. And you're allowing that 5-year-old buck that's actually inferior and doesn't have a lot of potential, doesn't have a lot of growing left, you're not taking him out of the herd. You're allowing that 5-year-old buck to live, the one that doesn't have a lot of potential. Now, I hope this makes sense because you need to manage your herd. If you're really trying to increase the quality of your deer herd, you need to manage it through age classes. You cannot manage a herd by strictly the inches and what their antlers are showing. allowing bucks that have the greatest genetic potential, the greatest antler potential, allowing them to reach full maturity. That's the way you're really going to be able to break through that glass ceiling. Again, just like I said, a book written by Dr. Bronson Strickland and Steve Damaris. Look into that. It's a great book, and it explains for certain people. Again, back to knowing your circumstances. If you do own enough property, you do have enough people on board in your neighborhood, then at that point you can try selective harvest to increase the antler potential on your property. Again, don't get this confused. You are not changing the genetics on your property whatsoever. You are not changing the genetics. That has been proven to not work. What you are doing is you are allowing, again, that buck that has the most potential to reach his full maturity, to express his full potential. Now, for us as an average landowner, this might sound, degrading, or might really, knock us down, because no, you're really not going to have a great impact by calling bucks. But don't worry about it then. So us that don't own that much property or aren't part of a co-op, what can we do to really have a great impact? I strongly encourage you, if you have not watched my video on summer forage and how that can increase the health of the herd, I strongly encourage you to do so, because I explain it much better in there. Us as smaller landowners, how can you have a great impact for your deer herd? That's by giving them the nutrition that they need. There are habitat improvements, like timber stand improvement, allowing more sunlight to reach the ground. By adding in supplemental food plots, you can actually have an impact on the herd, and you can persuade the movement on your property to give you a better hunting experience. So again, really what you need to take from this is that calling, you're never going to be able to increase the genetic potential on your property. It's just not possible in a free ranging setting. What the majority of us need to be focused on is increasing the habitat quality on the property and allowing you to hold more deer, give them as much forage as they need. This is a great statistic. I literally tell every single one of my clients that I go to, you have to understand how much food and how much forage it takes for a deer to survive day in and day out. Your average 150-pound deer is going to eat about 2,000 pounds of forage per year. That is a crazy amount of forage. Your average closed canopy forest is only going to provide about 50 to 100 pounds of that forage. You would need 33 acres of closed canopy forest to feed one deer for one full year. Take that same, now let's say you open it up. Let's say you open up the canopy, you allow some sunlight to get to the ground. Now what you can do is you are giving about 1,000 pounds of forage, depending obviously on your habitat and what it's like. It can increase that biomass found on the forest floor of up to 1,000 pounds per acre. Now you can hold about a dozen deer on that 33 acres. So understand what deer eat, the importance of providing that high quality forage, and don't focus so much on taking out that inferior buck. Focus on, again, your habitat and really how you can have an impact on that, rather than putting all your effort again towards what buck you're shooting. At the end of the day, all it is justifying your means, justifying why you shot that deer. It's not something that you're not going to be improving the health of your herd whatsoever. But if you are, owning a large enough tract or part of a co-op, Selective Harvest can have a little bit of an impact of just by allowing, again, your standing crop, allowing that buck that has the greatest potential, allowing him to reach full maturity. That's how you're going to have a great impact for your deer herd. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Whitetails Out of New York. Be sure to tune into all of our episodes for more tips and tactics. If you guys are interested in a consultation, we travel all around the Northeast. Again, check out our website. I'll put that down in the description below. I really, really encourage you, no matter what you're doing, to start with a plan. If you don't have a plan and strategies for why you're doing improvements in certain areas, what you're going to be left with is a property that's really split up, cut up. There's going to be no influence of movement. There's going to be no persuasion on your property. It's going to be extremely hard to hunt. You need to be making sure that you're doing improvements for a reason. Every single thing should connect on your property. Destination food sources, kill plots, bedding areas, travel corridors, they should all connect. They should all have a reason. And you need to make sure you're doing this in a way that you can hunt it. If you can't, really at the end of the day, you're going to hurt your property more than you're going to help it. So feel free to reach out, give us a call for a free consultation over the phone, learn how we can help you on your property. Again, thank you for tuning in. and I hope to hear from you soon.